Hey, DawgNation, happy Tuesday to you. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. What a show we have planned for you. Connor Riley on the way, as has been per usual here on these Tuesdays, but also special guest on today's program there as well. Azeez Ojulari, the great former outside linebacker at the University of Georgia, a prohibitive favorite to be a first-round pick coming up in just a couple of weeks' time, and a big guest for an autograph signing at the UGA bookstore. Azeez Ojulari going to be on today's show in just a few minutes. So what do you say we get it started? A lot of fun before then as well. DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
What a thrill it is for us here coming up in just a couple of minutes' time. We're going to get a chance to say hello to former Georgia outside linebacker Azeez Ojulari, a guy who's expected to be a first-round pick coming up in a couple of weeks, a guy who was huge for the Dogs on the field the last couple of years. We'll celebrate his time at Georgia, and we'll look ahead to what should be just a great night for him in the NFL draft when it begins here. We'll do all of that with Azeez Ojulari here coming up in a couple of minutes. Really excited about that. Connor Riley on the way today there as well. But stay tuned here in just a few minutes to hear from Azeez Ojulari on today's program. By the way, good to have you with us, DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Let me begin, though, today this way. You know, we're all, I think probably most of us, at least anyway, on the internet, on social media, sometimes more than we wish we were, probably spending a little too much time. And we have all these like memes and things that kind of fly by us. And to a certain extent, we just kind of get glossed over by the whole thing, kind of just almost numb to it. But every now and then you see something that's really, really funny. To me, the simplicity of this particular meme, I think, is really funny. I think there's kind of a takeaway here for Georgia football. This has been shared a million different ways, but I'll give credit to Ross Tucker because I guess Tucker, the NFL analyst, is the one who I saw did this first. Here's what he put out there on Twitter related to a debate that's apparently going on among Cincinnati Bengals fans right now about what they should do with the 5th overall pick. Take Jamar Chase, the wide receiver from LSU, or Penei Sewell, the offensive lineman out of Oregon. And the meme that I guess a Bengals fan must have created, and if you're watching on video, you can see this. I'll have to describe it for everybody else. You have option A, which is Burrow throwing the ball, Sewell blocking for him, and then the ball is going to a receiver described as anybody. Essentially, the takeaway here is that if you've got a good offensive lineman protecting for a good quarterback, then it doesn't matter who you throw to, you're going to have success. Now, the option B part is what's really funny. You've got Jamar Chase standing out there at wide receiver. This time, the anybody is just some average Joe offensive lineman, and Joe Burrow can't get rid of the football. He's being sacked. Like I said, I don't know why this is so funny to me. It's just super simple. It's like stick figure drawings, but it obviously tells a story that, hey, if according to the Bengals fan here that thinks they should take Sewell instead of Chase, that if you've got a good offensive lineman protecting for a good quarterback, then it doesn't really matter what you have at wide receiver. But if you've got just some average Joe, as they say sometimes in football circles, the JAG, just a guy. If you have just a guy playing along your offensive line, then you can have Jamar Chase as your wide receiver, but even Joe Burrow's still not going to be able to get him the football. And I think there's a little bit of a takeaway here when it comes to Georgia football there as well, because for as much attention as we've paid, and with good reason, to the idea of JT Daniels now coming back year over year as a firmly entrenched starting quarterback, and there's obviously been concern related to the Georgia wide receiver situation because of the injury that we know is serious for George Pickens and that we feared might be serious for guys like Jermaine Burton, Arian Smith. Come to find out, those weren't maybe as serious as we thought they would be. We've obsessed over that, even within position groups on the other side of the ball. There's so much attention being paid to what's happening for Georgia in the defensive secondary with all the losses and obviously the addition of Tyke Smith and kind of on and on you go with all that kind of stuff. I would dare say, and I'm later on in the show today when Connor Riley comes on, I'm asking about this. But I would dare say that we're maybe not talking enough about the offensive line situation in Georgia. And not because I know it to be bad. Georgia's trying to figure out who its starter is going to be there at left tackle. You've got interior offensive line spots that are open as well. Center with Trey Hill now gone. It's not that I know that it's going to be bad. There's a chance it's very good. Obviously, there's plenty of talent potentially in place, but it's just a very significant question. As the meme we just showed you a moment ago said, listen, it doesn't matter who you have at wide receiver, it doesn't matter who you have at quarterback. If you're not settled along your offensive line, then you're not going to be as good offensively as you otherwise could be. And at least based on the first scrimmage that we saw Saturday, or at least we didn't see it, we heard about it, Kirby Smart's reaction to it, the Georgia offensive line right now, a little bit unsettled, at least based on Smart in his own words, with these position battles ongoing. This is the evaluation he gave from that group after the scrimmage on Saturday. Listen to this.
It's okay. Not where we need to be. We're still moving some parts around, but certainly got work to do to get where we need to get. Got some young guys out there trying to play. And, when you do situational football, it's really hard to evaluate because you do 8 third downs in a row. You'll never do that in real life. During moving the field, we were able to move the ball at times, and then had a couple turnovers in the red area, and defense gave up some big plays, but then they played well in the red area at times. So kind of went both ways.
So Smart not really giving you a lot of enthusiasm about that. It's difficult to tell what he kind of takes from that, but not where they need to be yet. That's pretty clear. Now, the reason why a lot of Georgia fans may not be too concerned about any of this is because, as I said a moment ago, Matt Luke, the Georgia offensive line coach, has plenty of talent at his disposal in terms of finding the best 5 that are out there. And some of that's like young players, in many cases very heavily recruited players into the program. This could be Broderick Jones' time to shine. We've certainly heard he has a chance to do that. You think about a Marius Mims, who steps in as a true freshman right now. We saw Andrew Thomas start as a true freshman back in 2017. Could Mims maybe do the same thing this year? We'll see about that. You also start thinking about interior offensive linemen like Cedric Von Prawn. We've heard some good things about Austin Blaskey so far this spring. So there are some young players who have a chance to kind of fill out the depth here for Georgia and contribute to what could be a very good starting 5. In fact, Warren McClendon, who now is one of those veterans, kind of in place as a solid starter at the right tackle spot. We think that's where he's going to stay for this upcoming season. He says when he looks around Georgia practice and sees some of those young guys and what they're doing, he's kind of impressed with what he sees, and he thinks that Matt Luke, his offensive line coach, might be as well. Warren McClendon on the subject of some of those younger offensive linemen.
The young players are doing good. They're all doing good. They all, Coach Luke's been working with them. They've been putting in the work this offseason. They just want to come out and prove themselves, be able to put in and help the team.
So, as I said before, you don't have to go back too far into Georgia history to find moments in which young offensive linemen have been very pivotal for Georgia. Georgia glad they had them. True freshman in 2017 with Andrew Thomas, redshirt freshman in 2018 with Isaiah Wilson. But the program was in a little bit different position from a depth standpoint back then. You didn't have quite as deep an offensive line as you do now. You didn't have, as many other potential answers. And I think what a lot of Georgia fans kind of think now, sort of hope now, is that while it's great to have a Mims and a Jones and a Cedric Von Prawn and on you might go, Tate Ratledge for sure. It's great to have all these guys. There's also the thought that maybe some of the guys who've been here, whether it's a Warren Erickson maybe emerging as a full-time starter for the first time, or a Xavier Truss, who's kind of been in the program a little bit and got his chance to start in the bowl game. Maybe admittedly that wasn't a perfect day for him, but that experience mattering in the competition that's ongoing right now. Or even, in fact, someone like Justin Schaefer, who really has now been at Georgia for quite some time and, not as heralded a recruit as some of the other names we're going to mention here, but a guy that's kind of proven his worth by kind of being on the field, kind of getting that experience. Some of those guys who've been here for a while, maybe Georgia leans on them a little bit more than they have in the past because of the fact that all of a sudden this program now has more depth in that regard than it's kind of had before. That's something that Justin Schaefer himself talked about not too long ago when he met with the reporters, that he kind of looks around and sees some of these big recruits and says, hey, listen, I use that as kind of a motivation tool for me to kind of go out there and be as good as I can be. Schaefer's talked about that.
I always look at myself as the underdog because coming out of high school, I was an underdog. Coming in college, I was an underdog because I had people like Andrew and Isaiah, people like them in front of me. So I always knew I was an underdog. So I always just play with that chip on my shoulder and just feel like I got a point to prove.
I think the overall point here is there's no shortage of potential options for Georgia along the offensive line. But it is fair to say that as we look into all the things that are going on with Georgia during its spring practice, there are as many unanswered questions in relationship to this offensive line as there maybe is any other position group, including something like defensive secondary that's probably gotten more attention overall. So the bottom line is, for Georgia fans, as we head towards G-Day, I think the fans believe that eventually Georgia will have a starting five figured out and some depth behind that, and everything should be all good in Matt Luke's world when it comes to that offensive line. But as of now, maybe things are a little unsettled. And as Georgia fans kind of watch what's going on during the spring, seeing what's happening there at the offensive line seems like a pretty good place to look. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and happy to have you. No matter how you get to us today, video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Big thanks to our friends at ESOG for making it all possible. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, proud partners of UGA, makes them really fun to do business with. They've been good friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily for quite some time. They are also very, very serious about a couple of issues that can be a very big deal for homeowners when it comes to your foundation issues, your waterproofing issues. Engineered Solutions of Georgia knows what that's all about. When it rains, many of you get that kind of pit in your stomach knowing water's going to be creeping in, or you've seen those cracks show up in the walls, your foundation, and you know that that's an issue that needs to be dealt with. Well, the good news is when you put the folks at Engineered Solutions of Georgia to work for you, they've got smart people who are going to handle that and do that for you. 2 full-time engineers on staff. So very easy to get in touch with. Simply call them today. Just dial this number, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia, proud partners of UGA, good friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily for quite some time. They will get to work solving your problems. Solutions-based company. They're the one to trust. Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Make sure you find them today. All right, it's DawgNation Daily presented by ESOG here today. Later on, we'll kind of continue the offensive line conversation. We started there. We'll find out what Connor Riley has to say about that, what he's seen in terms of what McClendon, Schaefer talked about when they met with reporters this week, what Kirby Smart himself was kind of evaluated with the offensive line, and just kind of the rumblings and grumblings, the whispers about how this group is coming together. We'll talk more to Connor about that, everything else going on around Georgia spring practice there as well. But here in just a moment's time, really excited about having the former Georgia outside linebacker Azeez Ojulari on the program today. I think when you look at one of the great success stories that UGA has had here the last couple of years, Ojulari certainly stands out as one of those. This is a guy who came into Georgia, spent some time in that first year of 2018, battling injury a little bit, recovering from that injury. But certainly you get the impression that he learned while watching, and he bided his time, and they're late in the season, bowl game against Texas, of course, we remember. He had a chance to kind of get on the field, show what he was all about, and it just seemed fairly obvious. And there's less stuff that sometimes that seems obvious that turns out not to be quite as easy to predict as maybe we assumed that it would be. But in the case of Ojulari, that kind of transition from the 2018 season to the 2019 season, it seemed fairly obvious that that he was going to be ready for a real breakout year in 2019, and that's kind of exactly the way that went down. He proved himself to be in a very deep outside linebacker situation for Georgia. And that position group, when you look at the way that Georgia's recruited it, the talent that's been there, it's been as deep as any position group under Kirby Smart. That's not an easy room to stand tall above the rest in. But that's exactly what Ojulari was able to do, proving himself to be a top-flight player and a team leader in 2019, and then taking his game to a different level there in 2020, now on the doorstep of being a first-round pick here coming up in just a couple of minutes' time. So with that in mind, let's get ready to say here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, a very happy hello to Azeez Ojulari here on the program today. Azeez, thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are getting ready for the NFL draft, so the fact that you would stop by and say hello to us here for a couple of minutes certainly means a lot to us. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. No problem, man. Thank you for having me.
One of the things I was talking about before you joined us was that time that you spent recovering from injury in 2018, kind of as a lead-in to what you did in 2019 and 2020. What did you learn that season while you had to watch, while you had to see your teammates doing it? What did you learn by watching back then?
Yeah, I was just learning, just learning the game, learning the scheme. At practice, I was able to go against the best of the best, Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, at practice every day. I was over there servicing them at the scout team unit, so I was just getting better for myself. Just seeing everything, seeing the game speed, watching the guys in front of me like DeAndre Walker, Walter Grant, those guys that were playing, and just seeing the way they played, seeing how things played out. It was just good for me seeing it visually.
And of course,
like right there.
And, of course, last year, obviously you break out in a big way. The Georgia pass rush, I think, probably better than it was in any other year previous to that under Kirby Smart. How good did it feel to kind of lead the way? And, the Peach Bowl game against Cincinnati, for instance, probably don't win that game without your pass rushing efforts, or at least it would have been much more difficult to. How good did you and your teammates feel about the fact that you were able to, really kind of get after the quarterbacks last year and kind of, some of the havoc play stuff we've all talked about before? You guys really put that out there on the field last year. How good did that feel as a player to be a part of that?
Yeah, man, it was definitely big. It was great, actually, because, in that OLB room, D-line room, we all want sacks. We want to just find ways on our defense. We just always want to find ways to create havoc every single time we play, step on the field. So that's something we definitely preached that off season, coming into the season. So it was very big for us to up those numbers for sure, and the way we practice, the way we work at it every day, it just paid off for us all.
We're talking to former outside linebacker from Georgia, Azeez Ojulari. He's going to be a part of a big event at the UGA bookstore around the G-Day weekend. We'll tell you more about that coming up in just a couple of minutes here. Azeez, as you prepare for the NFL draft, I think one of the things that a lot of us are probably curious about, this is such a different kind of draft experience than maybe you would assume you would have been a part of. Thinking back a few years ago, the absence of the combine, obviously the global pandemic kind of affecting a way that scouts are able to see you all and kind of make those evaluations. Has it been more challenging because maybe you feel like you have less opportunities to show yourself? It certainly seems like Pro Day for you in Athens went really well, but how has the pandemic we're still obviously living with impacted your ability to kind of show what you're all about to some of these NFL draft scouts?
Yeah, I'll say since we didn't have no combine, the Pro Day was very big for all of us athletes for sure to showcase what we could do. The Pro Day was basically like our combine, and everything we're doing is on Zoom. So all the meetings with the teams is on Zoom. We just phone calls and Zoom, FaceTime calls, and everything's on Zoom right now. So because they can't have no face-to-face contact with us. So it's it's kind of weird though because everything's still on Zoom a year later. So it's very different though. It's a different experience for sure than I'm pretty sure last year that the guys that got to go to the combine. It's very different for sure.
So when you have a pro day and you've got so much at stake, folks are obviously watching you very closely because you're thought to be a first-round pick. Are the butterflies in the stomach, is it similar to a game day, the way you get hyped in a locker room before you go out there to play? What's the kind of mental approach to a pro day, similar or different than a normal game day?
I say it's probably like similar, you just trying to, it's football, so, me just trying to still go out there, do what you do. Don't think of too much, just do what you do. You've been playing football your whole life, so you're confident. Just go out there, do what you do, really. So it was a good time. I was prepared for it with all the hard work I put in. I was just ready for the moment, So it was good.
How weird is it when you are obviously, I don't know how much of the media stuff you pay attention to, but there's all this draft talk on the internet, on TV about who's supposedly rising up the draft boards, who's kind of, maybe falling down, where you might be picked in these mock drafts. A lot of Georgia fans are watching that stuff very closely. How much do you allow yourself to pay attention to that? And if you want to block it out, how easy is it to do that, just knowing that it's just so present all over the the media sphere right now, with folks making their opinions about who's supposed to be drafted where?
Yeah, you see it every day on ESPN when you watch TV. It's always on there. NFL Network is always on there for sure. But we just gonna wait it out and see what actually happens on the 29th. Because we don't really know what's officially gonna happen. It could get crazy and hectic on draft night, so you never know. So we're just gonna wait and see. To be honest, for sure.
I want to ask you about your Georgia teammates before I let you go. Let me squeeze in one more thing before we get there on that. It's obviously been quite a journey for you at UGA. So many of us have enjoyed watching the way that you've matured as a person and as a player there as well. How would you describe the role that Georgia has played in all this, whether it be Kirby Smart or Dan Lanning or whomever else? What about your Georgia experience would you kind of take with you as you prepare for the NFL draft, and how do you think Georgia helped you with that along the way?
Yeah, I'll say Georgia's top-notch with everything we do, no matter what it is. Kirby Smart, Coach Lanning, with Coach Sinclair in the weight room, everything's top-notch. They want the best out of you and everything. So no matter what it is, being on time, not missing a meal, everything's just straight business, straight work. So I'm going to carry that on with me to the next level. So it's going to be with me the way I approach the UGA, same way I'm approach the league. Just keep getting better every single day. Just a hard work mentality. Never give up. Just keep going. Just keep striving for greatness. Get better every single day. And I feel like I'll be successful. For sure.
So a lot of folks wonder, big shoes to fill for you there, for those who have to step in for you there at Georgia. When you think about those other outside linebackers, whether it be Adam Anderson or Nolan Smith or, Robert Beal, how do you feel about those guys? What's your expectation for that group without you here this upcoming season?
Yeah, I expect them to dominate, definitely for sure. Next season coming up, I expect them to dominate. The standard is there for them to set and go after it, and, all the boys could play. So Rob, definitely, I expect Rob to get out there, make big plays. Nolan Smith for sure. And I know Adam is on a different level. I believe Adam throw up some crazy numbers up there. I believe Adam can get in the double digits of sacks, and Nolan too. So it should be a great time watching those boys. I can't wait to watch them play for sure. Definitely.
Boy, that's really exciting. Before we say goodbye to you, let me remind folks, coming up G-Day weekend on Friday and Saturday, our friends at the UGA bookstore have a big autograph signing. Obviously, Azeez Ojulari is going to be a big part of that. You see it there coming up on the Friday night. Ben Cleveland, Mark Webb, Tyson Campbell, $20 for those autographs. They're going to be there from 4 to 6 p.m. And then on Saturday, April 17th, that's G-Day day, from 10 to 12 a.m. there that morning. DeAndre Swift and Azeez Ojulari are going to be on hand. Of course, Richard LeCount coming up later on that afternoon there as well. Azeez, how much fun is it for you to kind of be back with Georgia fans again, getting a chance to say hello to them there at the UGA bookstore, sign some autographs for them, something that maybe as a player you didn't get to do as much as you wanted to. Now as a future NFL star you get a chance to do. How much are you looking forward to being a part of that with Georgia fans coming up on April the 17th?
Yeah, I can't wait, man. I love the Georgia fans. I love the energy, the passion they bring every single weekend. I just love them. So it'll be great to get back out there, feel the atmosphere, the fans, and just a great day in Athens, a Saturday in Athens,
Yeah, it doesn't beat that. Saturday in Athens is as good as it gets.
Yes,
well, Azeez, we've certainly loved watching you play at Georgia over the years, and so many UGA fans tuned in today. Can't wait to see where you land in the NFL draft and what happens after that. So congratulations on a great football career to this point in time. Good luck as you head towards the draft, and continued success, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I mean, listen, I'm a Georgia partisan, of course. I love talking dogs, cheering for the dogs. So many of you are there as well. I will tell you that some players are just really easy to root for. And Ojulari has just always been one of those guys. He just kind of comes across and he sort of gives you that good dude vibe. You know what I'm saying? He just comes across as a good dude. And obviously I'm a little bit biased here, but you listen to the interview there. The polite way in which he speaks, the focused intensity with which the way he plays, it is just very easy to assume that, to me, he's a safe pick. And, listen, people talk about hand on the ground, outside linebacker, defensive end. You have, any kind of evaluation you want to, but the thing that, at least to my mind, that prohibits players from NFL success more than anything else is how you handle that transition. Clearly, Ojulari is someone who's seemingly going to handle that transition well. This is a guy who, in a very crowded situation at Georgia, you heard Ojulari, mentioning some of those names, the Adam Andersons, the Nolan Smiths of the world, in a very crowded outside linebacker, even guys who are not here anymore. Ojulari stood out from that group and made a name for himself. So I obviously feel like Ojulari represents a very safe pick as you head towards the NFL draft for some lucky team, obviously in the first round. What an exciting day that is. And listen, y'all have also heard me say a million times before there as well that great college football teams get after quarterbacks. That's just the profile. You don't have to hold teams to 14 points a game, but you do have to get after quarterbacks. You have to make it difficult to make the big explosive pass plays. And last year, Ojulari led a transformation for Georgia in that regard. It's a transformation that I hope continues, maybe even takes another step forward here this upcoming season. But you've got to give Azeez a ton of the credit for the way in which that kind of unfolded a year ago. So that's all really exciting. Before we move on to our SEC Through, can we just give another shout out one more time about exactly what's going to be going down at the UGA bookstore? We told you about Azeez Ojulari going to be there. Let me show you this on the screen one more time. Let's run through it all once again. So on the day before G-Day, April 16th, from 4 to 6 p.m., you got Ben Cleveland, Mark Webb, Tyson Campbell. They're going to be on hand. And then on April 17th, another trio of great autograph guests. From 10 to noon there that day, DeAndre Swift, Aziz Ojulari on hand, and then from 12 until 2 there that day, Richard LeCount, the great former UGA safety. You see the prices there. UGAbookstore.com if you want to find out more about this, or you can call them 706-542-3171. That's 706-542-3171. What a great weekend. A bunch of UGA greats hanging around there at the UGA bookstore in and a lead up to G-Day. Gosh, that's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to see all of that go down here in just a little bit of time. All right, let's get a couple of SEC through stories here just for a little bit before we move on. So this is kind of outside the SEC through world here a little bit, but I did want to mention this here really quick. So last night's national championship game, Baylor knocks off Gonzaga. We kind of said on yesterday's show that I'd been Gonzaga the entire time, but when you had seen how Baylor had been playing, you sort of wondered, does this make you want to hedge a little bit and, maybe put a little thought on Baylor here, just given the ease with which they coasted through the tournament and as good as the game was for Gonzaga against UCLA, possibly opening up a little bit in the way of, maybe a game a little closer than it was supposed to be against a team that wasn't supposed to be in the Final Four. And last night, Baylor exposed maybe some of those Gonzaga weaknesses a little further. And, the other takeaway here is, and I'm not the only one to say this, but it is really interesting, even from a timeline perspective of how, similar this sometimes, feels the situation in Georgia, but far worse at Baylor. You go back to 2003 when Dave Bliss was the coach there, and one of the Baylor players, it's just a tragic story, murdered, and, one of his teammates, admitted guilt in the murder of this player, and then all the NCAA stuff related to Bliss, and kind of the cover up after the fact of all of this. The Baylor program was in shambles around 2003, and that's what Scott Drew inherited there. And here we are all these years later, talking about Baylor under Drew being a perennial NCAA tournament team and now a national champion. If Baylor can do that in the heels of what they dealt with, then Georgia, who, much like Baylor, does not have, a lot of, NCAA tournament history, at least prior to this. Baylor, had not the Drew era. Georgia's had its, struggles in basketball. You want to go back to that similar time period, early 2000s. You had the Jim Herrick stuff, which was far less serious than what Baylor dealt with. But the kind of thing, the NCAA stuff that came along with that was a setback for Georgia. When you see Baylor do what it did in getting to the Final Four, winning the national championship, certainly easy to assume that there's no reason a school like Georgia or anybody else couldn't eventually do the same kind of thing. Sometimes when you see the way in which Georgia has had its basketball struggles over the years, you're kind of left to wonder, well, I guess if it's just impossible that Georgia could ever build a winner and be a consistent winner and a consistent performer, maybe it's just impossible for UGA all the way around. But when you see the way in which Baylor, coming back over the course of the last couple of decades from as bad a situation as any Division I program probably ever found itself in, Scott Drew turned that program to a winner, now a national champion. It gives you a little bit of hope there, I would say, and that's at least worth considering. A couple of other SEC through stories I want to get to here just for a moment. Kind of a scary story involving Rick Sandage. You may remember Sandage as a one-time UGA recruiting target, South Carolina defensive lineman. The Gamecocks won that recruiting battle. He was involved in a car accident over the weekend. I want to read this from 24/7 Sports. So I guess his vehicle had turned over, and Sandage was able to walk away from it. And this is a big guy to be in a vehicle accident, when the car ends up being overturned. He said all he had was a bad headache, cut on his hands. So I guess things better otherwise than they could have been. But a little bit of a scary situation for Sandage, a guy that many of our audience very well aware of as a former big-time recruit, signed with South Carolina. I think expectations are that he's supposed to be a big part of their defensive line story this year, but a scary situation for him involved in an accident. And then one more I'll get to here. I saw Aaron Beasley. We didn't do this story yesterday because it was still just developing, and sometimes I want to be careful stuff like that. But I guess Tennessee has now suspended Beasley indefinitely because of his role in what's been described as allegations of cruelty to animals, abusing a kitten. I mean, just when you think the stuff at Tennessee could not get any worse, that's like as bad a headline as you're going to ever get here. But that's the allegation that's out there. I guess facts are still coming in, but Tennessee has suspended Beasley for the moment. So that is that for a Vols program in desperate need of good news. That's as sinister a headline as you can possibly get. We'll make that your SEC through and keep the Georgia talk going as we do a Kroger Fresh Take now with our buddy Connor Riley.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Kroger Fresh Take with Connor Riley here on our program here today. Had a chance to hear from Georgia outside linebacker, former UGA outside linebacker. It's always hard to add the former in for some of these guys when you get so used to watching them play. But, Connor, how much did you enjoy getting a chance to hear from Ojulari a little earlier? And, boy, you talk about a guy that makes Georgia look good, on and off the field. I think it's pretty easy to say that Ojulari gets that job done. What a thrill it was to have him on the program today.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Ojulari. I think when he first started breaking through in the spring of 2019, I was sort of the leader of that hype train, say, hey, this guy could be a real piece for Georgia. And you and I were talking before the show. I mean, I think he's pretty clearly a UGA great, led the team in sacks the last 2 seasons, and I think is going to make some NFL team very happy at the end of this month.
And I guess there's some questions about the position fit, about what he's going to do at the NFL level. I guess I've read some of that kind of stuff. But in terms of who I would view as a safe pick, and obviously I'm biased here, so any NFL personnel men that happen to be tuned in, do your own research. But I mean, I just kind of view Ojulari as a pretty safe pick because he just kind of gives you good vibes, and obviously he's proven himself to be a hard worker, improved his level of physicality, his physical conditioning over the course of the time at Georgia. I'd have a hard time believing that Ojulari won't be a capable contributor at the NFL level. To me, he seems like a very safe pick.
Yeah, if he's 2 inches taller, he's a no doubt about it, top 10, maybe even top 5 pick. When you factor in the measurable, when you factor in arm length, strength, speed, what he did on the field in terms of production. I know there's a lot of edge rushers out there in that late teens, early 20s range, and I think of those guys, Ojulari has the best film. He just doesn't necessarily have the height measurables that, say, Jalen Phillips or Kwity Paye does. But to do what he did the last 2 years at Georgia, playing some of the best offenses in the country, playing really well against Alabama in that game this season against an elite offense, I think he's shown a lot in why he should be an NFL player.
And listen, I want to say this, and you heard Aziz a moment ago, very excited about what Adam Anderson's going to do this upcoming year, very excited about Nolan Smith, mentioning him by name specifically. There's all this talk of, why isn't Nolan Smith dominating the country yet? He was the former number 1 recruit, things like that. Sometimes it's just simple. Ojulari is going to be a first-round pick. You can only have so many outside linebackers on the field. In many situations, Georgia only has one outside linebacker in the game. At least that's been kind of the way they've commonly played. Ojulari is going to be on the field. It's hard to get him off the field. And now that he's gone, now it's time for somebody else to get to be what Aziz was. And as you heard Aziz say a moment ago, Anderson being able to do that or Nolan Smith being able to do that, that's still very much a possible and potentially even likely outcome with all of this. This program is still as deep as you get at outside linebacker, and all of a sudden now you get somebody else to say, I can play as well as a first-round pick played the last 2 years for Georgia.
Right. Aziz is going to be a first-round pick. And while Nolan Smith or Adam Anderson haven't necessarily blown up the way Aziz have, they've shown promising flashes. And I think if you want to look at another position on another team, after Najee Harris's first 2 years at Alabama, people were like, well, what's the big deal? This guy hasn't really broken out in the way we all thought. Well, it's because he was playing behind Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris, 2 starting NFL running backs. So when Harris finally gets his full crack at playing time, you see what he did in 2019 and then in 2020 for Alabama. I have no reason not to believe that I think Nolan Smith and Adam Anderson are sort of capable of making those similar breakouts now that they don't have a potential first-round pick in front of them.
And listen, I just want to say this. I think we saw an evolution a year ago begin, Ojulari kind of leading the way. I think it maybe continues this year. It is bad news for the rest of college football, certainly the SEC teams in which Georgia plays, if all of a sudden this goes from being kind of a defensive secondary-led defense to being a defense led by an outside linebacker or a defensive end edge rusher type. If all of a sudden the face of this defense goes from being like All-American level safety to All-American level outside linebacker, All-American level edge rusher, the entire fortunes of everything changes. This becomes a game-wrecking defense there at that point in time, and it doesn't matter how many points they're giving up or anything else. They're making things hard on opposing offense there at that point in time. This evolution that started last year, if it continues this year, that is not good for the teams that Georgia plays.
There is a different narrative around teams that have that game-wrecking presence in the front. You think Quinnen Williams at Alabama, Chase Young at Ohio State, that awesome defensive line from Clemson on that 2018 team. And while Georgia has had very good secondary players, when you play from the back to the front, you're just more likely to say, hey, we're not going to give up big plays. We're going to make you drive the field on us. Whereas if you have a front seven led, whether it be Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker, Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, if you have one of those guys being your stud, your alpha, it changes the way your entire defense is viewed and thus plays. And I think there's a reason that 2017 team has achieved something that the rest of Kirby Smart's time has not, and that's because Roquan Smith was really the best player on that defense, and that was a front seven-led defense that year.
So we talked offensive line off the top of the program. First of all, do you think the Bengals meme is as funny as I do? I don't know why I think this like stick figure, offensive line wide receiver comparison is so funny, but I do. First of all, do you think that's as funny as I do?
Sometimes the best memes are the simplest.
It really is. It makes me laugh. But more importantly than that, I sort of start to wonder if we're not talking enough about the offensive line. We fixate on the issues of the defensive secondary, seemingly with good reasons. We fixate on what may have happened with the wide receiver situation, obviously injury related this spring, and there's certainly good reason to do that, no matter how much Kirby Smart may have chided folks the other day on that topic. But given the fact that these other issues suck so much oxygen out of the room, are we paying as much attention to open, undecided starting positions along the offensive line as we should?
So, yes, I think the part of the reason part of it is just the offensive line. Nobody really likes to talk about it all that much. It is the most misunderstood position, or the least understood position in terms of diagnosing what and why things happen the way that they do. I think another part of the reason why it's flown under the radar a little bit is I think because there's a lot of people expect, even once you get into the season, there's the chance and possibility that combinations are going to move around and guys are going to change positions. I know it's a popular theory that Jamari Sawyer would start that Clemson game at left tackle, and then after that you move him inside when you take on a UAB team that doesn't figure to be as difficult, and you maybe put a Broderick Jones, a Xavier Truss, whoever that left tackle is going to be in there for that UAB game. And one thing that I've said quite frequently, and I don't want to sound like a parrot at this point, but I think the offensive line issue, and I feel comfortable calling it an issue, is a game 13 problem where it's going to take some time to figure out who that best five are and how they gel and come together. Whereas I think the cornerback position, I think that's much more of a game one issue where these guys are going to battle it out, and then once they get out there, you just have to trust them and believe in them. Whereas I think offensive line you can tinker with a little bit longer.
I mean, there's a very good chance that Georgia has a good offensive line. I mean, my gosh, most of the teams in the country would love to be sifting through the names that Georgia will sift through to establish its starting five. So, it's not obvious that Georgia won't have a very good offensive line. I guess when I think about the beginning of the season and against the Clemson defensive line, that's going to just be really, really good. You obviously have to select a starter, but what you don't want is to be one of these guys that gets selected by default. You'd love to have somebody kind of surge in that regard. Here's this guy that, boy, you can't keep so-and-so off the field at tackle or so-and-so off the field at guard or center. There's a very good chance that's happening right now. I'm just not at practice to see it. Connor, you're just not at practice to see it. And, Kirby's not under any kind of, he's not under oath when it comes to talking about this stuff during a press conference. So maybe somebody is surging. We just don't quite know as of yet. But to the extent that maybe no one has quite, just sort of leapt their way to the front as of yet, to me it's at least something worth monitoring. And I got to tell you, I don't think there's anything more interesting for me at G-Day than just making note of who those five offensive linemen that go with the red team, with JT Daniels under center, just making a note of who those five guys are. That particular moment from the very beginning of the game, I think maybe the single most interesting moment of the game for me.
Yeah, I personally, because I was asked this on Twitter over the weekend, I think we're going to see Xavier Truss at the left tackle spot and essentially the same offensive line that you saw Georgia roll out there against Cincinnati. I'm guessing that's going to be the first team offensive line on G-Day. But I think to your point, you want to see Broderick Jones win that left tackle job. And Broderick has earned some praise for his pass protection and how he has played there. And that's not really a surprise knowing him and the athleticism that he has there. It's, can he continue to bulk up? Can he continue to be physical in the run blocking way? And if he can do that, I think that's the potential key that unlocks the big ceiling that Georgia's offensive line has.
Yeah, let me just say this. When it comes to Xavier Truss and the Peach Bowl, the fact that I think most people would say he didn't play very well that day, that does not matter much to me in terms of what he might be able to do in 2021. I don't hold that against him. But here's where my evaluation may sound a little unfair to Truss. I would take it as better news that Jones is trending ahead of Truss than I would that Truss is trending ahead of Jones. The reason why I would take the Jones side of this as the better news is because, Truss was kind of the incumbent there because he started the bowl game. And so if Jones was once again, to use the same word I used a moment ago, surging ahead of him, well, that must mean something really good. In the case of Trush, you can't do the algebraic equation and kind of get the same certainty of how good is Xavier Trush playing, or is this a situation where he hasn't been pushed maybe quite as hard as you think he would have been by the former 5-star? I know that's a lot to process, but are you following what I'm saying there?
Yeah, and Kirby spoke about Xavier Trush, I think 2 weeks ago, said, he's got to consistently practice hard, and he's done some good things. I think to judge him solely based off what we saw in the Peach Bowl is a little unfair. First career start against a top 5 defense in Cincinnati. That's a really tough task, and the Georgia coaches clearly thought highly enough of him to put him out there instead of, say, a Broderick Jones. And I feel like we have to at least acknowledge this. When we talk about offensive line recruiting, so much of it is still colored by the fact that what these guys were as prospects. We just sort of tend to gravitate towards the higher-rated prospects. But you can look back a season ago. I'm sure you find takes from August, July saying, hey, let's give Broderick Jones a chance at that right tackle spot maybe. Yeah. And nobody was really talking about Warren McClendon all that much. And maybe other than Jamari Sawyer, I would say he was maybe the most consistent offensive lineman that Georgia had last season. So keep that in mind and don't necessarily just write off Truss just yet because he lacked the recruiting pedigree that, say, a 5-star Broderick Jones or a 5-star Amarius Mims had.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And listen, I've kind of joked about this before. I'm obviously a stargazer to a certain extent when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I'm not just going to go through and say, Cedric Von Prine, former top 50 recruit, he's definitely my center. Broderick Jones, former 5-star, he's definitely my left tackle. Amarius Mims, 5-star, he's definitely my right. I'm not just going to do that when it comes to this offensive line because, as Jeff told us on Friday, returns during practice pretty good for Austin Blasky so far. That's not a guy who has that kind of recruiting pedigree. You heard Justin Schaefer a moment ago saying that he's kind of fueled by the fact that he was less of a recruit maybe than some of these other guys are. His experience matters. I don't quite remember where Warren Erickson ranks, but I'm assuming it was behind where SVP was. I mean, that's a guy, Erickson, who I think could very much be the center for Georgia here this year. So there are some pretty clear position battles where I might even somewhat favor the lesser recruit in terms of actually earning that starting nod.
Right, and again, Andrew Thomas is such an outlier. He is so, I think, significantly colored how a lot of us should view offensive linemen. But a lot of these times, these guys need to develop. They need to put on significant weight. You've seen Broderick Jones even need to do that coming into Georgia. And so because it takes time for these guys to develop, a lot of these guys develops at different speeds. And a guy like Austin Blasky, who's a great high school wrestler, state champion down there in South Effingham High School, has developed and used those wrestling skills now that he's focused full-time on football. I think that's helped him and helped make an impact to where, if not this season, maybe a year from now, he's someone who is contending for a starting spot on that Georgia offensive line.
So what else when it comes to spring practice? I mean, listening to Kirby Smart from Saturday, and obviously we're going to overanalyze all these words just simply on the basis of the fact that that's about all we have right now. But if you brought a football fan that doesn't follow Georgia closely and listen to Smart speak on Saturday about the secondary, I don't think that football fan would be very surprised to find out the next day Georgia added a big-time defensive back from another program. I'm not making light, of the guys who are there because I think that they're still going to be called upon to do big things. But Smart spoke on Saturday like a coach who needed some help in his defensive secondary, and then by the very next day, of course this has been in the works for a while, but the very next day put a major punctuation mark on that by adding Tyke Smith. It all just makes a lot of sense when you follow the tea leaves with this.
Yeah, and the Tyke Smith thing, do not get it twisted. Georgia still has a massive need at cornerback. He's not going to fill that role. Georgia still needs Keely Ringo, Nyland Green, Amir Speed, Jalen Kimber, whoever it ends up being to become winning players, develop into great players come the end of the season there. I think what Smith brings most importantly, and the thing, Lewis Cine I think is going to continue to develop into a really nice player, but the thing, and you saw this after Richard LeCount went down, Georgia does not have a playmaker in that back half of the secondary like they did with LeCount last season, and that is what Tyke Smith brings. Georgia's defensive backs right now have 2 career interceptions. Smith alone has 4 in the 2 seasons that he has played at West Virginia. So with what he's able to do, with how Georgia's going to be able to be creative to move him around, I think you could see him at either the star or safety position. While he doesn't cure what you need at that cornerback position, he's going to help cover up a lot of different things in that secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that last part of it. I mean, you're right. He's not the lockdown corner that Georgia really needs. And in fact, it wouldn't surprise me if they're not done maybe when it comes to some of this kind of stuff.
They've still got 2 scholarships.
Yeah, so maybe they're still looking for a lockdown corner they want to bring in. But to be overly simplistic here for a moment, I can't imagine the job of trying to be a lockdown corner is not made easier by having somebody patrolling the middle of the field in kind of that slot, type position where so many of these newfangled offenses like to do their work anyway. If you're more solid there in coverage, I'm just assuming the job of covering on the outside becomes a little bit easier if you've got a guy who's done this a whole bunch and done it at a really high level. I think Smith's presence makes it easier for the other guys in that secondary to also perform at a high level.
Well, yeah, and not to bring up bad memories, but think back to that Florida game. How did they beat Georgia? By using the tight ends, by using the running backs. Smith is a guy who can potentially erase some of those concerns, and I'll be interested to see how quickly he gets integrated into the secondary. He does obviously have the familiarity with Jamal Adai, the new defensive backs coach for Georgia.
Okay, so anything else you want to say about football? Because I do want to ask you about basketball for a second. Anything else you want to say about football?
No, I think we've covered it. Maybe temper your expectations a little bit on what you see out of JT Daniels on G-Day, just because they've had so much turnover at that wide receiver position just in terms of injuries and who's healthy and whatnot, and expecting him to sort of look like the player that we all expect him to become the fall might be a bit much. And traditionally speaking, the number one quarterback for Georgia has not played well on G-Day, and that's by design by Kirby Smart. So I wouldn't go in there expecting JT Daniels to look like a Heisman Trophy candidate.
All right, so now my curiosity's going to peak here for a moment. Who's the guy on the receiving end of JT Daniels' throws that would have the biggest potential for, oh my gosh, runaway hype train? Is it Brock Bowers? Because I know Kirby talked about Bowers a little bit on Saturday. Like, who could have the biggest G-Day catching the ball from JT that we would just spend the entire summer just talking about, Heisman Trophy campaigns and everything else? Who's the guy?
It's Darnell. It's Darnell Washington.
Yeah, I think you may be right.
It's Darnell. I can't believe you say obviously you're a Stargazer, but
right.
He's the most. I mean, because even last year, you look at those that Missouri game, that drive where they were just forcing him the football, that opened up everybody's eyes, I think, to what he could do if he gets a consistent target share, and he's just so big, so physical. It's like watching LeBron James play. Kirby Smart said he's now up to 275, 280. He's just, if you get him the ball in space, he's just going to mow down opposing linebackers and safeties. And I think,
it's so true.
Good luck to Quay Walker and Channing Tindall and Lewis Seen if you're trying to tackle Darnell Washington on G-Day.
If Darnell Washington scores a touchdown on G-Day, the Monday after version of DawgNation Daily will be no shorter than 2.5 hours. It'll just be complete retelling of all the legend of Big O, as they like to call him, number 0, getting into the end zone.
Georgia fans love to complain about the tight ends not getting the ball enough as is. Could you imagine if Darnell Washington has a big G-Day game and then he lands like 2 catches in the first game against Clemson?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
Be fantastic. So, as I said before, I want to ask you about basketball. We'll do this kind of quick, but I do think there's something interesting to be said about that. Let me remind you that this is our Kroger Fresh Take here. And, of course, Kroger's got free pickup for you on orders of $35 or more. This is a really convenient thing to take advantage of. You can shop online. You can choose a pickup time that's convenient for you. They'll carefully pick out your order, and then they'll take it to your vehicle when you arrive. This is my family has done this a whole bunch. When you have young kids and obviously everything that's been going on, this is actually a very, very convenient option, and Kroger does a great job at this. So free pickup for you on that. You can learn more about that by going to Kroger.com/fresh. Stop by and you just visit your local store. You can talk to them about that there. But the free pickup option is a really great thing to take advantage of on orders of $35 or more. So check that out at your local Kroger. All right, Connor here, once again, as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. I said this during our SEC through a moment ago, that Georgia basketball is obviously, one of the not quite blue blood programs in basketball. It's had its issues, but no program has had more issues than what Baylor's had to deal with. For the younger audience who may not quite remember the early 2000s, to go back and read about the Dave Bliss era and the horrible murder of a Baylor player and the conviction of one of his teammates in that murder, and the way in which the Baylor coach Bliss kind of slandered the former player, the murdered player, as a way of kind of protecting himself from NCAA allegations. The whole thing is just gross. And I think that's where Baylor was at the turn of this century, and now cutting down nets, winning a national championship under Scott Drew. I don't want to make light of what's happened there, but it is just matter-of-factly fair to say, if Baylor can do it, anybody can do it. So if you're a Georgia fan, do you take any comfort in knowing that one of the most disadvantaged programs in the country has now risen the ranks and become a national champion? If you're a Georgia fan, do you take any solace in that?
So you bring up a lot of really good points there, and the main one, I'm going to tie Gonzaga in here too, because if you want to clown them tonight, sure, after what happened last night, they're still one of the clear 5 best programs in the country. And that Baylor, when Scott Drew walked in there, that was almost 18 years ago. Baylor went to its first Elite Eight, I think, in 2010. That was over a decade ago. And then they get to their first Final Four this year, and they just happen to win it there. Gonzaga, 22 straight NCAA tournament appearances, second national title appearance in the last 4 NCAA tournaments. These teams built patiently over time, and you even look at these teams. Gonzaga is a little different, obviously, with Jalen Suggs, but Baylor, a lot of these guys, they weren't relying heavily on freshmen. They weren't relying on newcomers. A lot of the guys, especially their transfers, Davion Mitchell transferred in from Auburn. Those guys came to Baylor, sat out a year, and then played. This is an older team. Patience. That is how Baylor was built. That is how Gonzaga was built. It took time in doing so. And maybe it's hard to do that in college basketball nowadays, especially with the transfer portal and the impact that is having on the sport. But when you look at Georgia, especially in the Tom Crean era, there just has not been a lot of patience, both, I think, from this Georgia basketball team and in sort of the way the basketball team is viewed. Obviously, there's turnover. Tunani Kamara entering the transfer portal. There's potential for more guys to go in there. But from a fan base perspective, everyone sees what Bruce Pearl did with Auburn. They see what Nate Oates did with Alabama and say, well, they did it quickly. Why can't we do it quickly? Georgia just clearly is a different job than what those two programs have. And Tom Crean is clearly a different coach. And if you want to get to a Baylor level, a Gonzaga level, or even a level where you're consistently making the NCAA tournament, I think you have to be patient. And maybe that's possible at Georgia. Maybe it isn't, just given the success of the football program. But it's going to clearly take time to build, obviously, and expecting Georgia to be what Baylor is now, I think maybe that's a bit far. But to get to a point in time, which is what Tom Crean was brought in here to do, where they consistently make it to the NCAA tournament, it takes patience to get there, and I wonder if both the Georgia basketball program administration itself has that kind of patience to build patiently over time, and if the fan base at the same point is willing to give that to Tom Crean and to this Georgia basketball program.
And I think the thing, though, is you got to be patient with a situation that is showing signs of, success leaves clues, right? Yeah. So if you're on your way to being where you want to be, there'll be hints along the way that that's what's happening. Now, is that happening to Georgia basketball right now? I'm just not quite so sure. I guess my only message here is I have no idea what the immediate future holds for Georgia. But the idea that the Georgia program is somehow this doomed program and therefore fans should never have any expectations for success, there's just too many examples around college basketball of the opposite, that Georgia nor any other program is truly doomed.
Exactly. You look Virginia, they were a slow build.
Yeah.
Villanova, while yes, they've won for a while now, it took them over a decade to get to where they are. In college basketball, yes, you do see some flashes in the pans. Auburn made the Final Four in the last NCAA tournament. This year, even if they had been eligible to play in it, they wouldn't have made the tournament. If you want to be a consistent team, if Georgia wants to become Baylor, so to speak, it's going to take time and patience, I think, from both sides. And right now, I don't know if Georgia has shown or exhibited the willingness to have the sort of patience it takes to become a great basketball program.
All right, Connor, thanks for being here. Kroger Fresh Take. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com. And, of course, we'll look forward to having you back on the show again very soon as well.
As always, it was a pleasure.
All right, so let me just say this. We get ready to leave here today. Don't forget, you can always be part of our Golden Shoe when we do our Gatorade roll call on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. We had somebody drop one in our comment section at DawgNation.com, kind of a part of our podcast cool down. You can be a part of the Golden Shoe there. Let me once again do what I do from time to time. Shout out our folks over on the YouTube side of things. For those of you that want to support what we're doing here at DawgNation, one of the best ways you can do that's by being a YouTube subscriber. You can get notifications set up there. It's a really fun, easy video platform to use. For those of you that like reading the website or listening to the show, whatever else, kind of the next step and all that's become a YouTube subscriber. A great way. I mentioned Connor before. He's got a show that comes on tonight. Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, all the recruiting stuff. You want to go back and see the Azeez Ojulari interview that we did a little earlier. It's all for you right there. DawgNation on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe today. How about this? Speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, Gator Hater Countdown. Georgia goes to Jacksonville, gets a win 207 days from right now. That's our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Have a great day, everybody. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Hope you enjoyed having Azeez Ojulari on the show today. That was a ton of fun. I hope you're looking forward to seeing him at the UGA bookstore as we head towards that G-Day weekend. That's going to be a bunch of fun. So really good stuff all the way around there. And time for your comments there as well. But just don't forget, though, that the RS and RS Andrews stands for Rapid Service. They will take really good care of you. Show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. It's hot yesterday. It's probably 80 degrees yesterday. Air conditioning's on. Make sure your system is ready to go for those factory fresh specs. Connor, I know you're doing 1,000 things, but if you want to bring the Gator hater down, that way people can see my money maker here. Sometimes I crack myself up. All right, your comments coming here. George Mullahan says, UGA fans don't know how to create the environment that the basketball Blue Bloods create. However, they can still show up and show out a bit. The money needs to go to basketball. So here's what I'll say. I mentioned this yesterday. I was in the gym a lot back, circa 1996 and circa 2002. In those particular moments, the Georgia gym was plenty loud and plenty full. And listen, any full building seems kind of cool, right? I mean, it's like, Cameron Indoor Stadium is not nice, but it seems awesome when it's jam-packed with people. And, Stegman Coliseum, I'm not comparing it to Cameron, but it's kind of the same way. That when the place was full and rocking, nobody looked around and said, this is not nice enough. I got to tell you something. Certainly with the improvement of the practice facility, I've had a chance to tour that and see that, but also with the way they've kind of added to the concourse and the glass, exterior. I mean, Stegman Coliseum as a venue is not as problematic as maybe it once was. So, let me also say it this way. That one of the things that aggravates me, and I'm not saying this to George, I'm just saying this in general, is this idea, well, if you want a good basketball team, you got to support that team, and then the team will use your support and they'll become good. That's not really the way any business really works. Now, listen, I love supporting all Georgia athletics. Most of you do there as well. But it's not like somebody walks around town saying, hey, I'll build a restaurant if you promise you'll come show up and eat the food. If you'll promise me you'll be there, I'll build a really good restaurant. That's not the way it works. People build a good restaurant or a good store, shop, whatever else, and then the people show up after that. But, it's the job of the entrepreneur to kind of build up the business. And I think a sports entity is the same way. It's not Georgia fans' job to make Georgia basketball better. It's Georgia basketball's job to make itself better, to be more of a factor in the NCAA tournament, so more fans will show up. This really is a Field of Dreams type scenario. If you build it, they will come. It's not if you come, they will build it. That's not the way it works. It's if you build it, they will come. And what Baylor shows you last night is there's no reason a school like Georgia could not build it and have a similar level of success. Not everyone will, but anyone obviously could. Frank Patterson reminding us of the turnover chain here. I know a lot of folks kind of want one of those, commit to the G chains. DMart42 says need to actually get those in-state recruits. Yeah, boy, it just seems like every single year this tournament is full of guys who hail from the state of Georgia, and that's obviously one of those things you'd like to see more of those. One of those guys. George also says I misunderstood his comment, and if I did so, George, I apologize. I wasn't arguing against you anyway. I was just kind of making a larger point, but I'm glad to have you sharing your thoughts. Walker Land says, as a student right now, the environment at basketball games, even before COVID, was abysmal for pretty much every game I've gone to. Yeah, it's not probably been the last couple of years as good as it once was. I certainly agree with that. But, as someone who was, in his 20s, much longer ago, I can tell you that the gym has been loud before. Maybe it hasn't been loud enough recently, but it has certainly been loud before. Let's see what else is going on. Frank Patterson says Georgia's second-string offensive line looked better in the bowl game than Clemson's first-string offensive line looked in their bowl game. Yeah, Clemson's got its offensive line issues for sure. That's a pretty good point by Frank there. Let me get a couple more on YouTube, then I'll go to Facebook for a second. Foster Moss says Georgia's got some of the best basketball players in the world if they could stay at home. I mean, the one guy who's always sworn by that's Bruce Pearl. Bruce Pearl, whether it was at Tennessee or Auburn, has made recruiting the state of Georgia just about as important to him as anything. He's always kind of viewed that Atlanta area as his lifeblood, taking that very seriously, through the years. And it's one of the reasons why he's made so many media appearances, things like that, because he just took the recruiting in the state of Georgia so seriously. So he would certainly back you up on all that. Let's see what else is going on here. Oren Chile checking in. Good to see. Randy Hall thinking about that next commit. Randy Hall's got an idea. He says we need a chortle button. One of the things I have kind of thought about for the show is, and I hope to be able to do, I want to get a soundboard up here so we can have some sounds. I kind of like the idea with that. Isaac Cruz says he'd also like to see Eddie get some Savage pads. That's a good idea too. Jermaine King says that the gym was loud a year ago when Ant-Man was there, so he was having a good time there with that. Jermaine King says Georgia's a team that's kind of built on shooting the three like Alabama. It hasn't had enough good shooters. Yeah, that goes back to the line that the former UGA coach Hugh Durham once said about, we've got some shooters. We just need to find some makers. It's kind of an old school coach's way of talking, but certainly that's kind of the thing of, hey, you got to have more than guys who are willing to shoot. You got to also have some guys who are capable of making some of those shots. Nick Roundtree taking his jab at Dan Mullen. You love to see that. That's always really fun. Matt Rukavina says, I remember being at games when Fred Gibson was a two-sport star for us. Listen, if you can find this, Georgia went on the road and won at Florida. This probably would have been 01. Am I making this? Is that right? It's 01, 02, somewhere around that time. Gibson had a big, Fred Gibson was actually a real basketball player. Some of these guys that play basketball, are kind of whatever. But Gibson was really pretty good at basketball. And I want to say he had 10 or so points. Road win at Florida back when that was a fairly big deal. Fred Gibson was a pretty good player. Larry Brown, former tight end, was a pretty good basketball player there as well. But, yeah, Gibson had a nice moment for Georgia on the road at Florida. Let's see what else is going on here on the Facebook side of things. Gerald Harmon says if UGA wants recruits to take them seriously, build another gym, show recruits you were serious. Yeah, I guess that could always help. I don't think the gym is much of a problem as it once was, but it could always help. Dustin Williams said Gibson made like 15 free throws in that game versus the Gators. Yeah, listen, he was a pretty good player. Nick Roundtree would agree on that. Miriam Martin Corbin says, hope to see you guys on G-Day. Have a great day. It's gorgeous in Georgia. Miriam, great to see you. I hope you enjoy the nice weather here today there as well. I'm looking forward to being able to do that. Neil Calvino checking in there as well. I love to fight the Gators, she says. I was thinking about Tennille the other day because I was watching Godfather 2, of course, takes place there in Lake Tahoe, which is near, I believe, where Tennille lives. I was just thinking about that. But good to have her checking in on the program here today. Keith Fold says, doesn't Connor have a soundboard? So when I say soundboard, I mean more than we have a soundboard. I mean more of like a sound effect board. You could wear it some of these are on the internet, they're like a Simpsons soundboard, things like that, where you collect all your sound effects and you can just play them. In this particular case, when I say soundboard, that's kind of what I mean. More of a repository for sound effects. But yes, we do have a soundboard. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says, always good to beat those lousy, stinking Gators at whatever we can. No doubt about that. Joey Robinson checking out. Good to see you, Joey. Appreciate you being here. Calvin Sanders says you got to lock down the state of Georgia, like they did in football. Here's one of those things where, I'd be really interested in this. I don't know how much of our audience necessarily would be because obviously football recruiting is just much more popular. But at some point in time, I'd love to have a conversation with someone. I don't know a ton about basketball recruiting. I'm not even really sure. I know there are 2 signing periods. I'm not even really sure when those dates really are. I just don't know much about. Even when I followed college basketball closely, I wasn't that well versed in basketball recruiting. Maybe one day, having a conversation with a basketball recruiting person of, why it's apparently so much harder to recruit the state basketball wise than it is football wise. Part of this is that, as many of you are aware, a lot of these guys that live in Georgia are not from Georgia. So there's no home there's no pull to the home state school because Georgia, while they may call it home, it's just not where they're from. In Atlanta area where obviously a lot of the basketball recruits are going to be congregated, that can be really true there. They just don't have any kind of emotional tie to Georgia, even if they live in the state right now. This is just a state where a lot of people have moved here from other places. And so maybe you have that working against you a little bit. But, I had a chance to meet Ant-Man before he enrolled at Georgia, went over and interviewed him one day at a gym. And, he was clearly kind of cut from his own cloth and sort of willing to kind of blaze his own trail. He was not that interested in what others were doing, going to the same school that other people were going to. He was plenty content to kind of be his own man in relation to that. And he also had a good relationship with Coach Crean, wanted to play for him. And that was a big deal for him there, and kind of following the footsteps maybe of Victor Oladipo and Dwayne Wade, who'd obviously played for Crean. But just generally speaking, he was willing to do what maybe a lot of other elite recruits, haven't always been able to. Joel Moody says, how about a shout-out to Davian Mitchell from Hinesville? He's on that national championship team, no doubt. Big performance from him for sure. Big performance for sure. Let me pop back over here and do a couple of YouTubes, then we're going to get ready to go for today. DMart 42. That is really funny. What else on YouTube here for a moment? Any football stuff before we go? A lot of basketball talking here today. Danny Blackman says, does Georgia have a bass fishing team? I believe they do. Am I correct in saying that Jake Fromm was on the team? Am I making that up? Are you saying you don't know, or are you saying he was not on the team? I want to say that Fromm may have been a two-sport athlete at Georgia. There's a chance I'm making that up. But I do believe they have one. I think it's only a club-level sport, but I believe they have one. Jordan Bowman feeling good about his Clemson Tigers. Obviously, a lot of that coming up before we head towards September in that season opener. William Perry also remembers Fred Gibson as a basketball player. Got other folks coming in here to troll. Always nice to be able to see. Anything else before we get ready to go? DMart 42 said, do we agree that most Golden Shoes gets to shave Connor's head in Jacksonville? Listen, as someone who grew up in the 80s in the kind of the hair versus hair era of professional wrestling, I'm always in favor of a good head shaving, but I actually do not want Connor to cut his hair. I want him to keep growing. I think that, everybody kind of needs their shtick, and I think that long hair shtick for him, I think really works. So while generally speaking, I'm in favor of hair versus hair stipulations, I am not in favor of Connor cutting his hair. That's just one person's opinion. All right, what else are we going to do? I think we're getting ready to go here. Enrique Murillo, happy about the Field of Dreams reference. Yeah, you never know what's going to come rolling out of the old lips here. All right, good stuff. Thanks, all, George Mullahan. Hope you have a great day there as well. Thanks for saying that to all of you there, too. Don't forget to check out Atlanta News Now, AJC.com. Braves, I think, are not slated to play again until Wednesday because of the COVID issues with the Nationals, but they're going to do a doubleheader. By the way, a Major League Baseball doubleheader is once again set for 7 innings again this year. So keep that in mind. But you got Braves coming up on all of that. Also, more stuff related to our states continuing to fight and battle against the coronavirus. We'll do a lot of that. And I guess some changes to the Braves radio network. That's an interesting story there at AJC.com. Find out more about that. And also, speaking of being outside, spring break, a lot of folks looking for some staycation fun. Really cool stuff related to some of the Georgia state parks. You can check all that out online. Atlanta News Now, AJC.com. Hope you look forward to that. We will see you back here tomorrow, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Then our R.S. Andrews cool down after that. As I said before, get your air conditioning tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Our friends at R.S. Andrews let you do that. Find them online at rsandrews.com. You have a great day, everybody. I'll see you back here at 10 a.m. again tomorrow. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.